thing in life is communication.
Right.
It's very difficult to be clear, concise, organized, unpackage things the way that they need to be unpackaged in a specific order. And what's off-putting when you start to get into that PMI world is the language and the communication. You're receiving all of this information and it comes off as Spanish or
Right.
some foreign language. And then as you start to study it, it just starts to correlate and connect to every little thing that you do. And if you ask, you're sitting in an NCO board and you ask someone leadership, they'll give you the Army definition of leadership. To where if you're sitting in a job interview post Army career and someone's like, well, how are you going to lead this project? They don't want to hear the Army definition.
Right.
Like they want, like when they're backing money and money's associated, they want to hear like what it is you do.
Yeah.
And if you can't be clear and concise with your verbiage and your words, you just lost that interview.
Right.
Because they want someone that can do that. And to me, that's what PMP and the project management did. Like it taught me a different language.
Welcome to the Leading with Vulnerability podcast. I'm your host, Yuma Barnett, and today my guest is Kyle Cicora. So I've known Kyle for a few years now, dating back to 3rd Ranger Battalion when I served there as the company first sergeant and the operations sergeant major. Got to know him a little bit as a platoon sergeant. Excellent leader. He's been around the 75th in the Army for a while now, and I'm sure he'll cover that when we go into his bio. But he's been around the regimental side, like the battalion side, and the organizational side. And he's also got a spouse that probably does more than he does actually on a daily basis, which we'll talk about a little bit. How you have two competing high priority careers in a household, and still are a husband and father. So glad you came on here today. I'll pass it off to you so you can introduce yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. So yeah, Kyle Cicora, born and raised in right outside of Baltimore, Maryland, Columbia specifically. It's kind of one of those planned cities to where anything you can think of is within a 10-minute drive. Um, pretty normal childhood. Parents split up when I was about 3 years old. My dad lived in upstate New York, Rochester specifically, so I spent a lot of time up in Rochester, and then majority of my time, all of my schooling, K through 12, was in Columbia. Played sports. I was never the first string athlete that was the star player at any sport, but I played almost every sport you can think of. Wrestled my senior year just because football all 4 years. Um, and then I really didn't know what I wanted to do with my life. It was just kind of one of those. I was interested in everything except really school. School was kind of a last priority
Yeah,
for me.
I feel you.
Yeah, and then I was like, I didn't want to waste any time or any money, but I loved experiencing new things. So I was just like, you know what? I think I'll do the Army. So I made that decision in about my junior year. Not sure that was the best call
Yeah.
because that kind of turned my senior year of high school into a wash. But I mean, I got through it, and I wouldn't replay or redo any decision that I made as a kid. I mean, I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be and
Yeah.
when I'm supposed to be there.
That's awesome. It's good to to kind of look back on that stuff and see where guys come from, and it shows. I think a little bit. I know you that you were a multi-sport guy, that you did a lot of things in high school, because I think that shows up in your leadership. That you're the way you lead now. And then we'll just go to the first question right off the bat. Get it out of the way. What's your definition of vulnerability?
So, so my definition of vulnerability would be just kind of the acceptance of not being accepted.
Right.
Like everybody wants to be accepted, and every decision you make throughout the day, something goes through your head as, what are people going to think about this? How is this going to be received? And being able to just be okay with like this might not be received, whether it's that awkward conversation, whether it's an action that you have to make, like this is gonna bother some people.
Right.
I think just being comfortable with knowing that whatever you're about to do or whatever you're about to say, people might not accept it,
Right.
which just puts you in that weird state of like, oh man, like I don't
Yeah.
I don't know what's gonna come from this.
Right. And I'll speak to from having known you for a little bit and being in meetings or jump master breakfasts and stuff. You were one of the guys that always spoke up and asked the question, and you could tell some of them weren't popular, but you were genuine about it. You were actually had you wanted the knowledge from somebody else in that room, which is vulnerability, especially when you have a bunch of A-type personalities sitting around together. It's hard to stand up and ask the question because nobody wants to be that guy, right? And it takes a certain individual to do it. And I think you've always done it well. And then in the 75th in the Army, I was very similar to you growing up, played sports, but when I got to the end of high school, I was like, I don't know what I want to do. I don't want to go to school anymore. I do know that. And I don't want to do what everybody else that's not going to school and stay in the same area and have that. So I joined the military. So what led you to the Army? And then what made you say, I want to chase this ranger path?
So I've talked to a lot of guys, and my first thought was, I'm going to join the Marines.
Yep.
So I went to a Marine recruiter, and the recruiter just kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I just didn't know. So
Yep.
um, listening to my parents, I've got a really close relationship with both every set of parents.
Nice.
So just listening to them, I was just like, well, let's see what else is out there. I kind of listened to him because then the first person I talked to was the Army recruiter, and I didn't even talk to Navy or Air Force after that. I was just like, he asked me what I wanted to do, and I was like, I'm not sure. I want to do something badass.
Right.
Like that's it. So he was just like, well, why don't you watch this Ranger video? So he sat me down. I watched the video, and I was just like, yep, that's what I want to do. That's it right there. He's
Yeah.
like, I can't get you contract. I was like, all right, well, call me when you can. And I walked out, and in true recruiter fashion, 24 hours later, he was like, hey, I did the impossible, and I got you your Ranger contract. You need to come in and sign for 5 years. That didn't even register that was a long time.
Right.
I was just like, I get what I want. Okay, cool.
Right.
Um, and then that that was that.
Right.
Um,
So you followed the traditional path as an 11 series, Fort
mhm.
Benning, went to, were you a RIP or a RAS?
Rip.
RIP. So
Yeah.
you're old. That shows our age when we start saying we went
Yeah.
to RIP. Um, what was your? So you've been in the 75th now for how many years?
Uh, 15.
15.
Yeah, coming
Can
up
you
on
believe that?
15
It
years. Yeah.
started with a 5-year contract, and now you're 15 years in. What? This is gonna be hard to summarize, but how has your time been in the 75th? And what would you say? What impact has it had on you as just a person? That transcends the army.
Man. Um,
That's like an hour-long conversation in
yeah, no,
itself,
no,
right?
it is. And really when I look at the regiment has truly molded me into the person that I am today. I mean, we're all our own people, but it's funny. I was just talking to a family member about this recently, to where if you go into the 75th, we're all flavors of the same person.
Yes, for sure.
So it's impossible to deny the moldability that the regiment has on every single person.
Yeah,
Um, we're all unbelievably loyal, committed, dedicated, and what the regiment does and how it does that to people is just fascinating. To where we're all different,
yeah,
but when you look at our core values and who we are as people, we're the same person.
yes,
Um, so yeah, like what impact has the regiment had on me? It, everything.
right.
There's been two constants in my life for the past 15 years. Well, we'll call it 13, and that's been the regiment and my wife. And without those two things, I have no idea who I'd be or where I'd be.
Right.
But to say that, like to like you said, that'd be an hour long
Yeah,
conversation if we deep dove everything the regiment's done
yeah,
to me or for me. Um, yeah, I owe the regiment everything who
right,
I am today.
right. And I agree wholeheartedly. The regiment was exactly what I needed at the time in my life when I joined the military. And I think you bring up a great point is that we are at our core, at our base level, we are so very similar. MOS, immaterial. We are very just similar people. And for guys, I spent almost all my time in the regiment. You spent your time in the regiment. As we've been around other organizations in the special operations enterprise, they're the same people too.
Yeah,
Their organizational culture might be a little bit different in the way they do things, but as far as like the base, we're all very similar type of people, which I found very interesting. And that I think that's one of the reasons we like it so much because we're just around good people that we relate with for, you know, 8 to 24 hours a day, depending on what you're doing. It's a great place. And then I think there's a special category inside the 75th. You come in, you do your first 4 or 5 years, you go to Ranger School, you get your tab, you kind of go into a different realm. But as soon as you pin those stripes on this organization, the 75th, and the Army as a whole, you enter a whole nother category. Uh, Being a Ranger NCO, what does that mean when I say those words?
Yeah. So I think it's really easy to know things. It's really easy to read standards and understand them and be like, oh yeah, I know what AR 670-1 says.
Right.
I know what our standards are supposed to be, but then to live them every day and look at yourself in the mirror before you leave work or leave your house on the weekend and be
Yeah.
like, if one of my guys sees me right now,
Yeah.
is that going to affect how they view the ranger culture or myself?
Hmm.
So it's just, I would say it's carrying a burden, but it's not really a burden. It's
Right.
because it just becomes part of your lifestyle.
Yep.
It's just like that extra thought in the back of your head
Yeah.
that you kind of get as an NCO, whether you realize it as soon as you pin on those E5 stripes, or once you realize that you've got guys watching you every single day
Yeah.
and they're going to emulate your actions. Like at some point you just start to develop this voice that's just like, hey, you're not living for
Yeah.
yourself anymore. It's this larger
Yeah.
larger thing to where it's just like, man, I haven't run 5 miles in a couple weeks. Like, let me test myself to make sure I'm not slipping.
Right.
And like that is a something you got to fit into your schedule to
Right.
where it's just like, man, like I don't want to do this, but I have to do this
Yeah.
now.
Yeah. It's a change. I think it's a mindset shift from the first 4 years or whenever it is you finally put those stripes on, to where you're no longer just accountable to yourself. You
Yeah,
are now accountable to two or three people, or 35 people, or 120 people, depending on where you're at. And you're right. I used to say to guys that worked under me, culture here starts at 06 and our culture ends at 06. So 24/7, you've got to represent the organization, the squad, the team, or whatever it is. And to be an NCO, you can't have slip ups in that. You will. We all do
yeah,
have mistakes, but it's that constant pursuit of excellence in in setting the example. I think that really sets apart the NCO and the organization. And like I said, we could talk about the 75th for hours and and each little detail and how it's shaped us as husbands, fathers, leaders, but we don't have that kind of time. So we'll move forward. You're in the military now, coming out of the global war on terrorism
hmm
in Afghanistan with numerous deployments overseas in multiple different capacities. Um, the Army's in a shift right now, trying to kind of figure out which way we're going, what we're doing. Um, how do you see the changes, and what are your thoughts on change and how you can attack change and just something like this for people who are considering joining the service now? What does it look like now?
I mean, change is inevitable.
Right.
Like it is. Um, and we could sit here and complain and fight it, but to what end? So I think one thing that will never change are those core values. Like kind of what I said earlier. It's like we're all different flavors of the same person, specifically to the 75th and really the Army as a whole. I mean, you talk to people in downtown Columbus, they're like, "Oh, you're in the military."
Yeah.
It's not you're 75th.
Yes.
It's just like, "Hey, you're in the military." So our core values, our traditions, how we look and act will always be the same. Are we the going to be the exact same army that we were during GWAT? No, but we aren't the same army that we were in the 90s
Right.
and previous. Like there's constant change. So I think taking the good, maintaining our core values, and if something doesn't interflict with that core value, we gotta run with it.
Right. Right.
To where I think that's another thing that we're trained to do. It's
Yeah.
we're told to do something and we execute, whether we like it or not. We're gonna do it,
Right.
and then after 2 or 3 years of doing it, you forget even why you were fighting it.
Right. Yeah, I think when it comes to change in the military, when I talk to people either transitioning out, they're leaving because the war is over, if you
Yeah,
will. First thing I say is just look at history. Once every 10 years at a minimum, something happens and the organization you're in, like a 75th, is going to be part of it in some capacity. And two, I think sometimes we lose track of how much change happened in those 20 years.
yeah,
There were deployments where big changes happened. We didn't do a whole lot overseas. You might get out one or two times, and then it would change again to where it was more kinetic and more dynamic. So, like you, to your point, change is inevitable. Seasons of change. Don't let what the Army's doing right now deter you from joining. You got to look at it at what it can, what it can do for you in a long, the next 4 years, 5 years, whatever your enlistment is. Um, you've been an advocate for the Ranger Regiment to move into more educational opportunities, right?
yeah.
The regiment has gone full in on helping. The Army's always been there, give you the GI Bill, give you tuitions, assistance, but the unit has not necessarily always made time and space or put a priority on it. Uh, the 75th started putting priority on education. You took well advantage of that
Hmm.
priority.
I did.
Um, what are your thoughts on education now that you're not high school anymore, not and that you've done education? How's it helped you? Just if you can expound on what the educational opportunities have been presented over the last 3 years, and then what it's done for you.
Yeah. So, I mean, over the past 3 years, I finished my bachelor's degree. And then I started to get into the credentialing world and the certifications. So I got pretty heavy into the project management stuff. I did the PMP, I got my Agile certification. I got involved with the Columbus, Georgia PMI chapter to kind of integrate in with those people. And it's I think we look at it wrong. Every single 18-year-old that gets through RASP, the first thing that they're given when they get to their platoon is like a packet of knowledge.
Right.
You will know this. And because it's so attributable to their job, like we are hungry to learn.
Hmm.
It's just a matter of how it's framed to us
Right.
or how we even frame it to ourselves. So it's just once I had that intrinsic motivation where it's just like, you know what, like I want to pursue this knowledge into this other field, and it was attributable to my lifestyle, like I thrived. I was taking two, three, even four classes a semester at one point while juggling work and doing these other things. And it was a sacrifice that I was willing to make because I wanted to.
Yeah.
So I think we've have a framing issue to
Yeah.
where like guys just don't see the relevance. And I'll say one of the biggest eye-opening events for me, you actually gave me the opportunity, was trying one of the executive education
Oh yeah. Yeah.
programs to where I did the design thinking course at MIT. I was just I didn't know what I was really signing up for. I was like, MIT, that's pretty prestigious. Like, sure, I'll give that a shot. And I ended up being partnered in a team, and I had a chemical engineer based out of Italy, a mechanical engineer based out of Colorado, and then a manager at Cisco, and she was actually up in Virginia. And I met my team for the first time, and I just kind of was awestruck, and I'm like, how am I going to be value added to this team? Like I felt this big in a room full of giants because I was like, you guys just they had so many things. I'm like, I'm an Army Ranger, and I think we diminished that a little bit because that's all we're ever
Yeah.
around.
Right.
Um, but by the end of that course, I was an unbelievable added value to that team. I saw it, I felt it. They were looking to me for advice, like, hey, which direction do we go? And it was the first time where I've ever felt like outside of the army, like this is where I can add value.
Yeah.
And it was in that management realm. So I started to pursue that, and it just that was the first time where I'm like, okay, I think guys that fear transition don't realize something like this. So I push a lot of the executive
Yeah.
education on a lot of the senior NCOs and stuff like that. I'm like, you've got to see it and feel it to believe it
Yep.
before you get out while you're in your comfort zone in the
Yeah.
army. Like you have you have the ability to walk with some of these giants in the corporate world. like you don't need to settle
Yeah.
for anything. Like you're
Yeah.
amazing at who you are and what you do.
Yeah.
You just got to experience it.
Yeah. You bring up some great points there that we'll unpack a little bit because I think it's very important. It's when you come in. I came in at 18 years old. You
Yep.
came in right after high school, and then I did 20 years. I didn't know what I wanted to do coming out of retiring. You probably don't know exactly what you want to do. Even the ranger that's getting out at 4 years doesn't really know what they want to do because they don't really know themselves. So one thing that education, finishing my bachelor's degree, did for me was help me understand myself, helped me put military experience into civilian language, which then transcended to when I'm having conversations with a person at Cisco. I understood what they are saying and I was able to add value, which was, to your point, the value that we bring is far greater than we realize or even closely realize. Um, and then the with PMP specific, and I'll have you speak on it because you're the PMP Jedi of the 75th, if you will. Is that's another great way to just if project management because people throw around project management like I'm going to go be a project manager that don't really know what it means. And a lot of guys, once I got in there, I was like, I don't know if I want to do this.
Yeah.
This is kind of terrible, right? Um, it's just a way to grow and do things. And I don't think now that you've spoken to people outside with PMI and all that stuff, what's your take on project management or careers in project management?
So so I would say every NCO understands the core fundamentals of project management and the difficulty I think that everybody has with almost everything in life is communication.
Right.
It's very difficult to be clear, concise, organized, unpackage things the way that they need to be unpackaged in a specific order. And what's off-putting when you start to get into that PMI world is the language and the
Yeah.
communication. You're receiving all of this information and it comes off as Spanish or
Right.
some foreign language. And then as you start to study it, it just starts to correlate and connect to every little thing that you do. And if you ask you're sitting in an NCO board and you ask someone leadership, they'll give you the Army
Yeah.
definition of leadership. To where if you're sitting in a job interview post Army career and someone's like, "Well, how are you going to lead this project?"
Right.
They don't want to hear the Army definition.
Right.
Like they want like when they're backing money and money's associated, they want to hear like what it is you do.
Yeah.
And if you can't be clear and concise with your verbiage and your words, you just lost that interview
Right.
because they want someone that can do that. And to me, that's what PMP and the project management did. Like it taught me a different language. It's like,
Yeah.
hey, I can lead a project by managing scope, schedule, cost. Well, oh, how have I done that? Insert Army
Yes.
story here,
Yes.
and it instantly correlates, and it's just like, okay, I'm talking to somebody that gets it.
Yep.
So if nothing else, it provided me just a few words. I would be remiss to ever say I'm a PMP Jedi because that is something that's perishable, just like everything else in this world. But I'm an advocate of the education
Yeah.
and the ability to speak to the project management at all.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think if you relate PMP back to military, right?
Hmm.
It's like you or me being a private, and we walk into an op order room with the company commander and his platoon leaders. We don't know what's going on in there. We don't know the
No.
language. But as soon as we went to Ranger School, we might not be masters of the op order, but we learn the language. So
Right.
the next time we walk into that room, as even an E4, just a year removed, we understand what's going on. We can see things and translate that back to the people that work for us. Even though I didn't test out for the PMP, that course itself, just learning the words like using stakeholders.
Yeah.
Stakeholders means this in the military. Okay, now I can cross reference and, as you said, build the story
Yeah.
because that's what they don't want the definition. They want a story of how you built the project out,
Right.
and that transcends PM project management or anything. You've got to get outside the left and right limits of the military and be broad and tell stories, which that's one of the things education helps with. Just better understanding of self and better ways to communicate. So people listen. I mentored a young He's about to be a young private coming into the military not too long ago, and he was coming in because he didn't want to go to college. So now, if you come to the 75th, you're inevitably at some point going to have to go to school. What What are you going to say? What do you say to those guys that are like, I didn't join the military to go to college. I don't need a college degree. I don't need this. I don't need this education. What do you say to them?
I mean, I would say you might not think you need it,
Right.
but you do.
Right.
I mean, if we took out the label of just told these kids like, "Hey, you got to go to college,"
Yeah.
and their team leader or squad leader was just like, "Hey, your job, log onto this website and sit through this army mandatory training for 2 hours,"
Yeah.
they'd be like, "Roger, Sergeant," and
Yep.
they do it without even complaining. Um, they don't complain when you hand them the packet that has muzzle velocity, weight, um, rates of fire for every single weapon system in the military. What
Right.
do? They take it back and they learn it
Yeah.
because they have to.
Yep.
Um, so again, like they college, that is the vehicle that we use to instill lifelong learning in our people.
Yeah.
Um, we're really good at doing the army stuff and the ranger stuff for the privates, but then once you kind of go to ranger school and you hit that team leader role and you just kind of follow in stride, my question to a lot of those guys is like, who studies at night more, you or your privates?
Right.
Like, you already know everything. What are you doing to continue
Yeah.
to know everything? And college is just an amazing vehicle to use to be like, you're going to take an English class,
Yeah.
take a math class. Like, nobody expects you to become an English major or a math major, but what does it do? It opens your aperture. So maybe you might touch something to where
Yeah.
it's just like, hey, I really like this thing.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, you're right. And I think there's some misconception for people that are coming in to the 75th now, and the whole failings thing is we're not asking you to get a college degree. The 75th is not, they're just asking you to take some classes to a certain credit level. And I think the word college is misunderstood because
yeah,
it's education, right? With credits tied to it. If you want to go to become an HVAC guy and go get training in that, that's training. That's lifelong learning. That's
yeah,
training. It's not just taking an English class. It can be a welder. You can go start taking welding classes. And shocker, a lot of that stuff involves being able to speak well written, and math. So it's just we're trying to make the 75th when I left was just trying to give guys and girls a better menu of options either in their military path or when they left, and making sure they use assets that were free to
yeah,
them because all that stuff you said, PMP, agile, MIT, your college undergrad, was paid for.
yeah. I mean, I use tuition assistance for I'd say a good 80 to 90%. I kind of made a personal choice to where I was just like, I had the time, which is not something that we can always schedule.
Yeah.
So to me, it was worth the personal investment in myself. But yeah, the tuition assistance, certification assistance,
Yeah.
all of these programs, if you're not taking advantage of them,
Yeah.
you're just wasting money.
Yep. Yep. And that was me. I wasted money for like 17 years. So we'll transition from that a little. Well, last question about the uniform, and then we'll
Yeah.
get into some family stuff. And we spoke about it a little bit before. What was your most challenging day inside of the Army of the 75th to this point?
Yeah, like to narrow it down to like one specific day is pretty impossible. To me, it's just kind of very challenging moments
Yeah.
that then turn into a multi-day kind of thought process. I mean, throughout my career, I've deployed 13 times, and each one of those, the later I got or the older I got, the more kids I had,
Yeah.
the more stuff that I was leaving back home. Like the first one, pure excitement, right? But then when you're kissing goodbye and dropping your kids off at school, um, like my kids to this day, they're like, "Dad, I've seen you cry before."
Right. Yeah.
And it's just like, well, when? When did you see me cry? They're like, well, that one time before you left for like 2 days. And I'm like, that was 4 or 5 months I was gone, but
Right.
that's awesome that you only thought it was 2 days. But like that, like you just see what you're leaving behind. my wife would always get mad because she was like, "Well, you never cried when you were leaving me." I'm
Right.
like, "Yeah, you're different."
Right.
So, but yeah, like leaving the kids is unbelievably hard. And then like having friends pass, um, whether you're there in the moment or whether you see the struggle coming, and you see guys struggle with alcoholism, with just identity crises and things like that, to where you kind of just wake up one day, or you get a text message and it's just like, hey, so and so's passed, or he's on his way out the door, and you just kind of like, that moment then
Yeah.
turns into 2 weeks of just thinking about it.
Right.
It's just like, what could I have done? What
Yeah.
happened? Why does this keep happening?
Yeah.
So to say one day was the hardest struggle, um, is pretty impossible for me to do. But it's just those moments that just turn into like the staring at the ceiling nights of just
Yeah.
like, what is going on?
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you probably have the same similar answer for what's your best day. It's hard to narrow it down, but by the best day. But what are those moments or those times that you look back on, extreme fondness, those moments that you hold on to and you hold on to for the rest of your life?
Yeah, I mean, looking back, like putting yourself in the shoes of that moment, you probably wouldn't have said it. But it's just like those
Yeah.
squad live fires, those platoon live fires, when you are just dead exhausted,
Yeah.
you're unbelievably self-critical. Um, but then like you see and you feel the progression, and those last iterations where it's just like you're near perfect,
Right.
and you just have those moments of solitude when you're just looking around in complete chaos,
Yeah.
knowing everybody is doing what they're supposed to do.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And then being able to crack a beer with those
Yeah.
guys afterwards, and you're just sitting there and you lose track of time, and you just kind of are just talking in the locker room or the cages afterwards, and you're just like, that is what being in regiment
Yeah.
is. um
Yeah, you're right. It's those. I look back very fondly on those most difficult moments, or the
yeah.
moments that were at the time I couldn't wait for it to be over.
Hmm.
But uh, that because that's where the bonds come in, and that's where the conversations usually go when you're doing stuff or talking. Either in the cage or in my room if you're down at the VFW talking to the old guys. So, uh, going from that, from the military side to the your more personal side, you're married,
Hmm.
you have kids, and you've done you for me, I was able to have my career, and my wife kind of put hers on the side to raise the kids and do the family thing. Your wife did all of her education while you're going 100 miles an hour inside this organization, and now has a demanding career of her own. And you've made it through all of that. Just speak a little bit about what it's like having two competing high priority education and careers and kids, and how you try to find balance in that, and how you guys manage it.
Yeah, I mean, we struggle every day.
Right.
um but it is sheer and utter compromise. I don't think either one of us is happy about the other person's job ever.
Right.
Um, but we also have an understanding to where it's just like, my wife loves her job. When we first met, um, she worked at, I think, Red Robin, or Logan's Roadhouse, or something. And then just kind of, it was a decision we made early on in our marriage. So we had our first child, and she still didn't know what she wanted to do, and we just kind of sat down, and I was like, what is it that you want? Do you want to be the stay at home mom? She's like, no, I want to go back to school. So it was just like, it was an agreement to where it's just like, I will support you and whatever it is that you want, but I need you to support me throughout my career as well. So it was a decision that we made together, and I don't think we fully understood how difficult that
Right.
was going to be. But looking back now, I mean, my wife's incredible.
Right.
She's amazing. The things that she has done and the things that she continues to do are mind blowing. Like, I would say she has it harder than I do,
Right.
for sure. I mean, we've got 4 kids. She finished her master's degree to become a certified midwife. 2 years ago, and she was just like, "Hey, I got an offer to work under the OB in town here in Columbus. Can we please stay?
Yeah.
Because I can't." She wasn't getting any job offers, or she kept getting denied as a new grad, because that's like the hardest point for them, is just like,
Right.
who's going to take that first chance on them. And she had someone willing to do that here, and she asked me, and I was just like, okay, like I'll make that sacrifice, and I'll do that at work. And she couldn't be happier.
Yeah.
She loves her job. My kids love where they're at, and we're in a really good place as a family. But every day she's on call about 2 or 3 times a week, and it's just, we come home at night. She's like, I'm on call tonight. I'm like, no, I did totally forgot. Like, I don't really keep track of it as I should. So every night's kind of like a roll of the dice as
Uh,
to whether I'm going to be alone or not.
yeah.
Um, but just the fact that she's happy, she
Yeah.
loves her career.
Yeah.
She's got her own meaning in this world when it comes to her career, her own purpose. She's just unbelievably driven, and loves it. And
Yeah. I
I can't, I mean, it's my wife. I can't take that away.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I'm sure it's cliche to say, right? Cliche. It's communication.
Hmm.
And I'm sure there were some very tough conversations that were in there. You had to get real about things. And marriage isn't always pretty and perfect and
No.
sunshine and rainbows, but it's that never giving up, right? And always finding a solution that's fair and equitable to both parties is what I've always tried to do. I know that's what you have to do when you have 4 kids, 2 careers. It's just you got to talk to each other. You got to get comfortable being uncomfortable, and like you said, you can see it in your eyes. You're happy for her. You're happy
Yeah.
for her successes, which is awesome. Uh, and then you have the kids part
Hmm.
of that, which is a challenge in the military. Always saying goodbye, whether it's for 4 months or for a week for a trip, because that next deployment's right around the corner, and there's a week at home that's getting robbed from the kids, really. Um, what are some of those ways that you've maintained, being a father while having this in this career?
Um, Thank God technology is where it is today.
Yeah.
Um, I mean, although, like, our kids, particularly when they're young, don't necessarily remember whether you were there or not. But in that moment, even just knowing that you're there supporting them is huge.
Yeah.
So, my daughter did dance competitions for about 4 years. So I think I only might have made it to like 3 or 4 out of the 20 that she probably competed in. But there were times where I was like, hey, I'm going to wake up at 2 in the morning overseas. I'm going to call you on Skype, and I could watch it on Skype, and she'd be able
Yeah.
to run off stage, and she'd be able to see that I might not have been physically present, but the fact that I was there, she doesn't remember that I wasn't there, because she remembers that I was able to support her.
Yeah.
Um, so really, it's just constantly trying to be there in any way that I can be. Um, if it can't be physically there, it's over the phone, or it's I'm watching the video that they posted on YouTube and calling her about
Yeah.
it later, and maybe pretending like I was there.
Yep.
Um, but without, like, using technology to its best advantage that I can.
Yeah. It is great that we have the technology that we have and the ways that we can communicate back with home. And you're right. You said it. It's about always trying. You're
Hmm.
always trying. And even if you can't make it or you can't watch, you can't make the call, they know that you tried. Right.
Hmm.
And I've had that. I've had my son say that. I know you can't be there. I know you're trying to be there, but I understand as he got older. So um, just never stop trying. Right. As I think is just, just with your
What
kids.
age did your son start to realize that? Because I'm still waiting on that
It was
one.
about 11 years old when he really started like saying it. When the deployment stuff has started making sense to him. Like,
Yeah.
okay, I've got dad for the next 6 months, and then he's gone for another 4 or 5. So that was when the career decision started to trickle in, because the 4-year-old and the five,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
don't know what's going on. They know I'm gone, and like you said, I'm back, and they thought I've been gone for a couple weeks in there, right? But It's fun being a husband. It's amazing. The opportunities the military gives you, some of the things that you can do on the side, and the
Yeah.
stuff that they do if you take advantage of them is great. Let's bring it in, land the plane. If you could go back 15 years ago and you
Hmm.
could grab that private that was not wanting to go to school and just wanted to do something different, what advice would you give that private coming in the military?
I'd say be all in.
Yeah,
Like you've got to be all in. Um, to 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 think that my words of wisdom would have done anything to 18-year-old me
yeah,
is laughable.
right,
No one could tell me anything.
right,
But I mean, I had good support. My parents were unbelievably iffy about me joining the military. I mean, it was 2006 when I joined, so it was kind of things were pretty hot,
yeah,
and they
yeah,
knew that, and they knew what I was going to do. I didn't even realize it, but they were like, "We support you, but we're iffy."
right,
Um, but me telling myself like, "You're making the right decision. Be all in." Um, that probably would have been all I would have
yeah,
been able to say to myself, to where it's
right,
just like, you're making the right choice.
yeah,
Don't question it.
yeah.
And yeah, that's
That's
probably what I would have said.
And I think that's beautifully put because it's simple, right?
Hmm.
If I'm talking to somebody who's coming in and wants to go to RIP or to RASP, right? And they think that since I've been in the organization for 20 years or did all these deployments, that I'm going to give them some big grain of wisdom. And I usually just say, don't quit.
Yeah.
You've got to get past your own mental thoughts of quitting or walking over to the fire when everybody else around you's quitting. If you can talk yourself out of quitting, you're probably going to make it
Yeah.
as long as you're there. And it's that simple. And then you can take care of the rest once you're in. And I think that mentality is really all in. Don't quit in everything that you do. So we'll bring it in. We'll do our little gimmick here at the end, where we'll ask a couple of questions that were not on the script. I'll do you two, and then me too, and then you can go first, and then I'll go, and then
Sure.
we'll end it here. Again, I don't. You might people watching might think I checked these out beforehand, but I have no idea what's coming here. So you can send it.
All right. If you decided to get cremated, where would you want your ashes spread?
Ooh, where would I want my ashes spread? That's a tough one, I guess. Man, I probably, I guess probably as much as I'm never gonna go back and live in New Mexico up there in those mountains. They kind of formed me and shaped me into the person I was today, the way I grew up. And I'd say there's a couple mountain ranges there where I've done some elk hunting and stuff over the years. And just go put me back out there in the mountains of New Mexico. One, because it's where I came from, and two, it looks a lot like southern Afghanistan in a lot of ways. So big parts of my life. I guess that's where I'd have my and it's easier to go to New Mexico than it would be to go to you know to the KG Pass to spread my ashes. All right, I'll go here. This could be interesting from you. What was the worst time you ever put your foot in your mouth? And do you remember what you said?
Oh man. Um, the worst time that I put my foot in my mouth. I mean, I do that on a daily basis. Um, I would say the most I do it is I've got a terrible short-term memory.
Yeah,
Um, and my wife throws it in my face. I'm pretty sure she takes advantage of it. She's just like, "Well, you said this, but you must have just forgot."
yeah,
So I don't know if I'm necessarily putting my foot in my mouth, but I have the tendency to change my opinion
yeah.
and not remember what my old opinion was. And my wife has absolutely no problem throwing it back in my face. But I can use forgetfulness to my benefit as
Right,
well. Be like, "Oh, I said that. Yeah, I totally forgot. I didn't." So it would be probably on the daily basis of getting corrected or talking against my former
yeah,
self not 2 days ago.
yeah. Absolutely. I can relate to that.
Yeah.
All right, next one.
All right. If you could be a personal assistant to anyone, who would it be?
Oh, there's a lot of people I could do that with. I think right now, current environment, Elon Musk,
Yeah.
because he's like all over the place. I thought I kind of knew where he stood politically and all this stuff, and now I'm not so sure where he stands politically and what he's doing. I'd just like to get in his mind, just kind of see behind the curtain for a
Yeah.
minute, what that looks like running that company that he has, and then having the capacity to think outside and do other things in there. I think it's just kind of fascinating. He would be an interesting one, I'm sure, to be around for a month or two to see how what his
See how
process
this
is.
Twitter play works
Yeah,
out.
absolutely. That's. I was reading about it this morning. So,
Yeah.
which celebrity do you think is a positive role model for kids today?
Ooh. Uh, I don't know if this was just something that randomly pops up on social media, but I never realized how good of a dude Keanu Reeves is.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like that guy has had an incredible life story, unbelievably humble. Um, and he's kind of that quiet professionalism
Yeah,
or professional. So because you don't really know, you just are like, oh yeah, the guy from The Matrix or
yeah,
Speed, or John Wick,
yep,
and it's just like, oh, he does all this action stuff, and it's just like the guy is just an incredible person.
yep, yep,
And I think that is because he's not in the public eye as much, or he's not outspoken about it. It just doesn't get publicized as much. But
yeah.
the dude's just an awesome guy.
He's an awesome guy. He's a worker. He's a hard worker.
Hmm.
It's funny you mention him because I used him as an example to my son with John Wick. You've probably seen the training videos
Oh
of
yeah,
him.
yeah,
Like
yeah,
he
yeah.
actually did all that gunplay stuff.
Hmm.
And I was just saying to my son, like, look at this guy. This is not in his wheelhouse. And he's out here giving it his all so that he can give the best performance, on his own. And like he's gonna if you look up some of the stuff he's done. He's just a great dude, like down to earth, rides the subway.
Yeah,
People will see him all the time. So, good stuff. Thanks for coming on here.
yeah.
It
No,
was a
thanks for
pleasure.
having me.
For all you out there watching, listening, make sure you do all that good stuff like, share, subscribe. And if you have questions about the podcast or about, Kyle's really tied in. If you're joining the 75th or coming in the military, I'm sure he wouldn't mind having a mentorship call with you. I know I enjoy doing stuff like that. We just have to find the time. So, thanks again. Great talking to you, and we'll check in with you guys next week.
Thanks.